Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Frank, actually listening to you, I'm not sure whether I should have been encouraged or coming from a bank that if there is money, there is fraud, we have a problem, right? But the encouraging thing about The encouraging thing about the industry we work in is that it impacts effectively everyone. And I'm actually somewhat pleased to hear that, Shadrach has been counting off Saturdays. So my name is Kwasi. It's a Ghanaian name. If you know anything about Ghana, it's a dead giveaway, right? It's what we call a day name. But it means I'm born on Sunday. So Shadrach, unfortunately, Saturday is not my good day. So if you're doing anything on a Sunday and you want me to show up, that is the day I'm in my element. But beyond that, it really does help us to sort of chart the course of the discussion we are having today. And all our speakers have done such an excellent job introducing us to this particular discussion. For us in the financial industry and coming from Citibank, I think what you will hear is leveraging what most of you do and trying to channel it to the customer base that we work with. So what that means for us is, you may know Citi. Citi is effectively an American bank. We're present in South Africa. And we are a full-fledged bank focused on the corporate client segment. Now, why do I say that? Because the perspective I'll share with you is very much focused on the corporate client. Yes, we're a big global bank. We're in 96 countries. But the core area that we feel our expertise kind of comes out is in the corporate and investment banking space. And the perspective that we are talking about in terms of how these solutions are used is effectively the one that impacts the corporate treasurer. In all the firms you work in, whichever industry or sector it might be, there is somebody in corporate treasury, finance, somewhere that is deciding how to run the financial operations of the firm. We try to engage and provide opportunities for these areas to be able to proceed. What we've realized is there are certain priorities in the client segment we work with that come out. You ask yourself, if you're a corporate, what are the things that really matter in terms of how to manage your finances, clean up your treasury operations? Well, there's been a long history of how digitalization in banks have worked. In fact, Mr. Chen and others have all touched on that. Citibank is proud to actually be one of the first. In 1977, if you didn't know this, go and look it up. Citibank introduced the first ATM in the streets of New York City. That's the whole concept of when digitalization began, bank cards, and the journey that today has led to some of the fantastic things we've been hearing about. But what does that mean for a corporate client today in terms of how you think about how you manage your treasury operations? Well, these are some of the key priorities that are coming out now. And this changes as the world changes. So we see, things like fundamentals. We see the fact that you need to work on digitalization, payments, people, and obviously the challenge with restricted markets. Now, before we talk about all of these, I think the point to think about is we are focusing on the digitalization aspect, which for all of you here, given the industries we come from, is using technology, solutions, all the wonderful stuff going on to change processes, make them more efficient. There is obviously the digitization aspect, which is the age-old part of just making old-fashioned analog stuff more digital. So that relates more to information, changing it from the paper to some form of a digital form. What we are focusing on within the banking space, and certainly for the corporate client segment, is how can you make your processes more efficient? How can you get better value out of this? Now, it's important for us because, again, to stress on the point around where there is money, the basic value is how do I get better value in terms of money for the work that we put in? And so we are looking for ways that these things can improve. Fundamentals. This is what a corporate treasurer will be looking at. You have to understand, how do I do my liquidity management, FX risk management? These are core, basic really. But the issue is, if you don't outline what this looks like for your company, for your industry, we don't have an understanding of the platform we are going to work on. We need to know what the basis is. What are we trying to fix? What are we trying to improve? And largely, these are the areas. It starts with identifying these things, and then we roll them out. Bank account administration is a big issue. KYC has been mentioned. And now most corporate clients are actually on a mission to reduce the volume of bank accounts, because the more there are, the more chances there are for fraud, for misapplication, misuse. So if you don't need it, you probably shouldn't have it. What we see after that is, how do you then position the firm for digitalization? There are different ways of doing it, but you really have to synthesize your ecosystem, which is assess the data that's available to you. We obviously have to evaluate what that technology suitability is, which is where we come in and really we ride off a lot of solutions that people like you are using in the room, and then upskilling your talent. The last thing you want is somebody like maybe myself, who has no clue, right, what to do with the digitalization process to run a new digital treasury, if that is where you're looking to go. So you want to make sure you're building up your team to walk that journey, or else the solutions really don't work. This is an interesting area. Payments is a core part of what we all do as firms, because money has to go in, money has to come back. How it gets done is the key area. There's a lot of talk about instant payments. It's a norm in most markets now. But some industries actually don't care about instant payments. They want to take longer to pay you back, right? And so they are not keen on instant payments. But others are, because it's the bread and butter, it's the lifeblood for funds to be able to be real-time, effectively. And that's where the industry is going. And that's the solutions we are trying to help clients with. And that's what you see. But to do that, there's obviously a lot of the platform behind it, but there's the real-time data point, and then obviously that key point about how you bring it all together in the digitalization discussion. Focus on people is important from a treasury perspective within a corporate treasurer's view, because you really do need to make sure that the firm, and that's you speaking for your firm, is actually ready for that entire ecosystem that is managing its way in that direction. So one of the things that we see is, just trying to make sure a career is mapped very well. And through all of that, they can get better value out of it. Restricted markets. We sit in the Southern African market. I talked about Citi being in 96 countries. I'm originally from Ghana. I mentioned that already. And I've worked with the bank in a number of countries. But having gone through them, the US, working there, fairly open market, not as restricted. Then I worked in Brazil, very restricted market. Then you ask yourself, well, how do we get money to move around in a very comfortable way? Well, not that easy. You have to start thinking outside the box. You have to start finding what regulation allows you to do, what is possible and not possible. Then I worked in the UAE, somewhere in the middle, right? Depending on how you think about it. Open in some ways, not so open in other ways. Then I most recently, actually, before South Africa, worked in Tanzania within the context of East Africa. And if you know anything about East Africa, Tanzania is probably the least flexible of the East African markets. And by that, I'm taking out some of the other big markets that may not necessarily have the banking operations that we would be working in. But that is effectively what keeps a corporate treasurer awake. If you work in multiple markets, you need to understand, how do I get money to move around? If I can't move that funding, then that funding really doesn't have the same value for me. So you start understanding, well, I pile up my liquidity in a particular country, but if I need to move it to another center where it's more useful, what are the avenues? And then it comes through different discussions. This is actually the part where we work with a key stakeholder, like a regulator, to understand, what can I do? What form of repatriations are available? But if you don't spend time to unravel this area, it really increases your risk profile, because concentration becomes a massive, massive challenge. This is effectively what we then spend time talking to clients about. What do you really want out of all of this? A key part of it is, at the end of the day, we need to be able to do more business, more revenue, more sales. We need to be able to have more efficient processes. Then obviously the key part, we need to manage risk. We've talked about how all that is a key problem in this industry. It's coming in every direction. You are managing treasury risk from an FX risk management perspective with cash, all of that. But then there's obviously the cybersecurity and all the others that you were just hearing about. These all need to be thought about within a treasury digitalization discussion, or else something is going to give. So trying to make it all come together is really where we try to come in. So accelerating the path to digital. What do we really do there? And sort of going through. These two things is what you've heard a lot of people talk about. And some of you here are much better experts on these than I can ever be. How AI works, robotics, cloud computing. But these technologies have to intersect with the trends that a corporate treasury is trying to work on. Now, once you put those two things together, you understand, I'm really trying to just change customer expectations, do better good. Then we know what opportunities actually are available to us. That's what we try to make sure that journey can reach. One of the key ones for us really is not just that optimized balance sheets, because without that, most firms don't exist. You really need to be able to get to the point where you are using these technologies in the right way to deliver the right solution. That's what we would like to be able to come out with in this area. We run a survey with our clients, with the significant corporate client segment, and understood what are they saying? What do they really want out of this? And for the sake of time, I would only talk about 75%. We want to improve timeliness and accuracy of cash forecasting. How many times have you got your forecast on your own personal account right? In terms of, this is what I think I'm going to spend over the next 3 months, or the next 6 months. And a friend, a family member comes to you with a great idea. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do this? You forget about the budget. You forget about the forecast. Where the money is, you find the money. Is that not how it works? That's the same challenge we face within the corporate space. So if you can't realistically and intelligently figure out how your forecasting works, really that becomes where working capital, liquidity management challenges become a big corporate issue. But for us, the one thing we always have to resolve is the fact that budget is always a constraint. How much do I have to spend on all of this to get it done? I want to do it, but is it affordable? Is it reasonable? And this is how we really try to synthesize this. Working capital trends are the usual, right? What everyone is trying to achieve, because it's sort of how you cycle through, how you keep a company moving. Inventory buildup, supply chains, all these things are critical. But I'll draw your attention to the very bottom, because those are the solutions that we really try to put in place using all the technology that's available. Again, supply chain finance is effectively where a company is trying to leverage what a financial institution or other providers can do to support your supply chain. And there are different types of supply chains, but effectively any provider that works into your vertical. That's a great way to build capacity. You may think of it as, sort of providing money for someone else, but that's how you build capacity to effectively increase your own wallet share in business. Then there's great things like dynamic discounting, receivables reconciliation, which I'll show you some case studies on just shortly. But all of this leads to how we, as an institution, would be able to present solutions that work for a client. I showed this just to show that it was mentioned earlier. Nobody does this alone. This business and this entire industry of trying to use technology in banking is really to understand that one company, one firm cannot do it all. Doesn't matter how influential you are. Yes, we try and build an ecosystem, but there are so many different partners in that. Because as a firm, these are the things that the Central Treasury is trying to do. There are lots of platforms that they would typically use, from trading platforms to core treasury. And there's where we connect all of that into a bank. We call it host-to-host sometimes. It's basically an integration. Now, how that integration is done is really where all the magic happens. Talk about, if we can put it that way. Because we have to be able to solution for all the work that is happening here, the flows, instantness, reconciliation, and make it all work within your financial transactions that come through and out of the bank. That's the part that requires discussions with all of you. So if we are not already working together, maybe that's an opportunity. A few cases just to show how some clients have used this. This one is, a consumer company effectively looking at data analytics. The challenges there, how to leverage data to be better, focusing on the solution, which is really what digitalization is how do you automate processes? If you can automate the process of building the forecast we were talking about, how to manage your FX risk management, well, that's maybe a way of driving more efficiency in your business, headcounts, other inefficiencies within the business that we can do better at. Second case study, a technology company, which has lots of flows, as you would imagine. I can only imagine what, Brad has to deal with in terms of transactions that come in and out with the millions of customers you work with. If you don't have a great way to reconcile that, that's a nightmare, right? You literally need an army of people going through documents, statements, or maybe some very massive Excel sheets trying to figure out who paid that money, when, how does it line up? How many times have we paid something and then the provider tells you we can't find your funds, right? That's part of how you can get this solution there. There are different ways we do it. We call some payer ID, and it really helps you to get those transactions to talk to each other from a banking perspective and what you're doing in the industry. And a similar one with an automotive company, but adding another sort of incremental solution we call City Smart Match, which really is using some of the technologies we've talked about today, machine learning, sort of learns from the transactions you do. As you process more, it gets more intelligent. It figures out what you're doing. It starts to match better. And actually, in most of our testing, the match rates, especially even in this case, is 100%, which means after a while, but that's the point that other speakers have touched on already, so we don't have to talk about it, is you can use technology for good, but when the technology gets a bit too intelligent, you need to be careful, right? For our own good. But that's where solutions like machine learning become very beneficial in this space. My conclusion, all the work we do with clients is to sort of try and navigate this journey and where it's going. How can we then help today and in the future? Today, what you see in the digitalization world within a bank like ours is not simple, but things that we've come to know. We almost take them for granted. Some of the solutions you think here, self-service, being able to manage this stuff yourself, online banking platforms, mobile banking. This stuff is almost easy now. Well, what is the next stage? Next stage is what, on average, we think we'll be seeing over the next 1 to 3 years. Some of it's already showing up, right? The use of APIs in rate inquiries, transaction initiation, that's already starting to happen, but the uptake is still relatively low. Using that to your benefit is something that we believe clients can do. Then obviously there's a forecasting piece, all that intelligence, and I think things like ChatGPT take it to a whole different level. But what we see in, I would say over 5 years, going further out, is where one of the big discussions is the whole idea of how we can leverage, especially distributed ledgers. Lots of talk about blockchain, where Mr. Shadrach works, how that can be used to actually manage these discussions. Trade finance, what we do within the digital payment space. But I think one other thing that we are seeing, it's been mentioned actually this morning, is open banking. And by open banking, we don't really mean just us as an institution trying to connect into more channels. But regulators are now in some markets, and it's coming more into Africa, starting to make sure in their minds, they are leveling the playing field. But by doing that, it means we all have to grapple with the opportunity, but as well as the challenge of now having a completely open system, which comes with some of the challenges Frank has told us this morning. Because yes, the focus is on the customer and making life easier for the customer in terms of being able to migrate, but that's where real-time becomes really powerful. That's what we see happening, and that's what we are trying to do. This is what the future picture looks like for corporate clients, and this is really where I conclude, is that future, that's what you see 5, 10 years forward, is using these solutions to deliver these type of answers. How do I really merge? We are seeing physical supply chains, processes, how you get goods from one end to the other, having to now be matched with financial supply chains as well. If those two don't talk to each other, well, we can't get the right result. There is a huge focus on how we use data in this particular aspect. And a lot of the solutions that we use and we leverage and bring to clients' availability is really trying to use data. And that's where that concept of digital twinning technology comes in. It's an industry term. It's not something we own. Effectively, it's being able to run almost like a copy model and test the process, digitize it, and make sure it works before it gets put into application. That's what we are starting to see, and the whole concept of real time is where we all want to get to, and we are getting there. And one of the key points that I'm actually quite intrigued here clients talk about is to get to the point where they are using virtual reality, walking around the offices wearing screens, right, to get things done. So you ask yourself, where is the concept of my desk then? But I guess in the metaverse, we all don't have desks anymore, right? So that's where these are all going. So final point from myself is banks like myself, and there are many of us in the room, are really trying to leverage the technology that is available to do great moves forward within the corporate treasury space. There are certain challenges in that process. You have to get through regulation because, again, we still work in a sector that is very heavily regulated. But you have to understand what the provider needs. And that's where this discussion comes in. A lot of what I've talked about this morning is really understanding what the priorities are, what the challenges are, knowing the issue, and being able to solution for it. And I think that's where we can bring the most value. And that's where all what we talk about in a summit like this becomes more useful, because we are bringing this sector, hopefully many years forward. And by the time we discuss this again, we can already talk about these solutions being in application. Thank you, and I appreciate your time this morning. No, thank you.
Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.